Hi, and this is Exploring with Em and Stu.
And today we're here in Norfolk to continue our Every Church Challenge. So today we brought you to the parish church of St Peter's and St Paul's here in the tiny village of Tunstall, not far from Halvergate, where we're going to be taking you for a little look around the rather fascinating remains of the church here.
That's it, and also before we start this video, I just want to say a big welcome to Brian Moyer, our new Patreon.
And if you want to learn a little bit more about our Patreon, check out the end of the video. But for now, let's take a look at the remains of this church. The village of Tunstall sits at the end of a long lane. It's not somewhere you drive past to get anywhere, and really the only people who probably stumble across it either live here or possibly have taken a wrong turn off of the main road. But believe it or not, Tunstall was actually once a coastal village which overlooked a great estuary which silted up and was drained in the 16th and 17th century and very likely had a much larger population back then. A church has sat on this site since at least the 11th century, but the one we actually see here today dates back to the 14th century and it's been changed and modified over the centuries. So I'm going to take you for a little tour around the outside of it and show you some of its features. Now, the nave and the chancel that we'll take you for a look at in a moment are actually the earliest part of the church, being 14th century. And this great tower that we actually see here was a bit later, being built in around about 1450. And as you can see, we've got a large square belfry. And if you look right at the top, you can actually see that top stage was rebuilt a little bit later. But this large tower was actually used as a bit of a beacon for the ships that used to be out there in the estuary. Now, of course, as you can see, the nave is in fact in ruins today, but we'll take you for a little look inside. And here we are inside the nave, where I think we'll find Stu, and we'll tell you a little bit more about it.
And here comes Emma from doing her introduction.
Yeah, we're just currently stood inside the 15th century tower. I think, like I said, it was built in about 1450, a bit later than the original nave and chancel, which we're going to talk to you a little bit about in a minute, I think. But the little village of Tunstall is really quite lovely, isn't it?
It is.
It really is sort of set in the middle of nowhere, and you really wouldn't just stumble across this, I don't think, by accident, would you? But I'm going to take you for a little tour, I think, around the nave now. There's not an awful lot to see here, but there's enough to tell you a little bit about its history, and it's got a few interesting features that I think I'll point out to you. So this medieval church, like many, was built of flint and stone predominantly, and it would have had a slate roof. And actually, if we look all the way up the tower there, you can actually see the remains of where the roof would have been. And we can tell by those remains that this was in fact a really sort of steeply pitched roof, which I don't think we often see them quite as steep as that. But more interestingly, you just look slightly further down, you can see that it's actually covered in these holes. And again, something we don't often see so many of. These are actually called put-lock or put-log holes, and they were used during the construction to hold wooden scaffolding beams, and they would have, I believe, been just sort of sawn off after use. And of course, this would have very likely have been rendered afterwards, but it's actually covered in these little holes, which is quite fascinating to see. Now, like many of these medieval churches, they were changed and adapted over the centuries, and this one, of course, is no exception. We've actually, in the south wall here, got a bricked off doorway where of course an entrance would have once been. Now, I don't know when exactly this was bricked off, but it certainly looks like it was likely some years ago. So just leaving off that bricked up doorway behind us, and we're just walking down the ruined nave, and as you can see, we've got some rather lovely windows just behind us. Not the biggest of windows, but they've got some quite nice ornate window tracery just there. And I can only imagine that they were very likely full of beautiful stained glass windows once upon a time. But with a shrinking congregation, the church actually fell into disrepair, and in around about 1660 the actual roof collapsed, and it was sort of unused for a few years. And in the early 18th century, with the church of course being in such a state of disrepair, the remaining parishioners actually asked if they were able to sell the one bell that was left in the tower so that they could raise the money to actually restore the chancel into a church that they could actually use again. And we're going to take you for a little look inside it. So in 1705, the large archway between the nave and the chancel here was bricked up, and it created the new parish church of Tunstall, which is really just a small chapel now. Now, this original chapel was in fact quite smaller, and I'll talk to you about that in a little while, but it did actually have a south aisle that was through some archways, and as you can see, that's been bricked off now. But if we just bring you down the aisle here, if we come to the end here, it was extended in 1853 to make it almost twice the size. And again, we can quite clearly see some of the remnants of some of that extension later on. But it also had this beautiful window, and I can only assume that this is very similar to the ones that we see from the original medieval nave out there. Now, all the pews and the pulpit and everything that we see here very likely dates from when the church was extended, and like I said, in around about 1853. But we have actually got a little feature that dates from the original medieval chancel that we're going to take a little look at. Because what we've actually got in the original part of the chancel is what they call a double piscina. Now, a piscina is like basically a little wash basin where the priest would have washed his hands in one side, and the other side he would have washed his vessels and things like that. Now, these double piscinas were only really sort of constructed around about the turn of the 14th century, which helps us to date this church to around about that time. But I've never actually seen a double piscina before, so that's quite nice to see here. Now, as you can see, this was constructed in a very sort of simple way, and it would have had a little vestry that we've just got off the side there, but you can really sort of see sort of more clearer the adaptations that were made to the church if we take you around the outside and sort of show you some of the original sort of masonry. So we're going to get around there and we'll have a little look at that.
And just been inside the nave, is that right?
Chancel.
The chancel.
Well, what was the original chancel?
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, and obviously there's some great original features in there that we've just seen, but we felt that I think it's about time me and Emma had a little bit of a chat with you. So I think we'll have a bit of a walk and chat, because we're actually leaving the church now and actually going round to the front.
I wanted to show them some of the features of the original chancel and how it was adapted sort of, well, I think in the early Victorian times, really, because of course with the congregation dropping sort of, I think it was around about 100 and 107, something like that, in the early 1900s. Of course, they didn't need such a big church, and so this small sort of chapel chancel, as we'll call it, was really sort of enough for them. But you can really sort of see the adaptations that were made a lot clearer on the outside than you can on the inside, because they clearly did such a good job of sort of covering them up.
That's it.
On the inside there.
But what we'll do is I'll throw you over to Emma just to tell you this last bit about the church and its adaptations. So we'll see you in a sec.
So I wanted to bring you to the outside of the chancel because, like I said, you can see those adaptations so much clearer. And if you can remember when I was in there, I was saying that the chancel originally had a south aisle, and you can really clearly see the masonry where there would have sort of been two arches originally that I can only assume would have come out to a sort of an extended aisle that would have been here. And as you can see, we've got this nice little guy sort of just peering out there. So I don't know if that's part of the original structure or if it's been taken from somewhere else, but that's quite nice. And of course these windows, I can only assume were probably added sort of around about that 1705 when they decided to turn this into the new smaller parish church. But the most interesting bit is in fact this piece on the end here, because I said that they extended it in 1853 and they decided just to use sort of some crude bricks. And although you can barely sort of tell from the inside that it is brick, it's quite jarring really against that lovely flint work. And I guess it only goes to show really sort of how primitive and how they weren't really too fussed about having these ornate and decorative churches later on over the centuries.
And there we have it.
Yeah, so this is really quite a typical story, of course, of a shrinking congregation with a shrinking village. Of course, once upon a time, this was a lot more prosperous. It was arable farming, cattle grazing, and I think even sort of reed production, which was quite prosperous around here. But then, of course, what was a congregation of over 100, nowadays, little more than about 30 people live here.
Yeah.
And of course, the parish of Tunstall has really been merged in with the larger village of Halvergate, and their church, which I believe is also called St Peter's and St Paul's, is only about half a mile down the road there. So I suppose anybody that still wants to come and worship at these churches,
They still
probably go there.
That's it.
But it's still quite lovely to sort of see it and to think once upon a time this sat quite close to the edge of a great estuary where you could travel to places like Acle and Great Yarmouth, and there may have even been ships out there once upon a time. I mean, it's quite fascinating.
It
And
is.
most people wouldn't have a clue that that used to be here once upon a time.
That's it. But if you have enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. It's been building our channel. It's been building a great community recently, and it's all down to you.
Absolutely. And of course, we're continuing our search for these churches in Norfolk, and we've got a playlist of many other churches in our Every Church Challenge. So if you like Norfolk churches and local churches, then please check that out. And like we said at the beginning of the video, if you'd like to see a little bit more exclusive content, then we've got a lovely community of Patreons, and you can help support us if you'd like to join them. And I shall put all the information in the description below there.
That's it. But as for Exploring with Em and Stu,
here at the quite wonderful St Peter and St Paul Parish Church here in the tiny little hamlet almost of Tunstall in Norfolk. Thanks for watching as always.
we'll see you again.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.